analyzed our footage, we know what's wrong with this particular clip, and then we have read our scopes to see to confirm our assessments. We need to make some corrections. So in Premiere, there's a couple different color changing or color manipulation tools, but Lumetri Color is the one that we're going to use. So up here, you have two different sections. You have the master and you have the one that's on the timeline. So this one, if you select this one, you're actually correcting the source clip. So if you have a clip and you're not, you're correcting it from the get-go. This would be just the one on the timeline. So difference between that, if you have a really long clip that you are correcting and let's say you only use bits and pieces of it, you might want to just correct the master, and then if you're using multiple, then you can clip with it. So for the sake of this, I'm just going to use the one that's on the timeline right here. So I'm going to make sure my scopes are showing. So with any Adobe program, they're very intuitive as far as what you need, and putting all the basics in your control, from sequencing from up to bottom, left to right, and Premiere is no different in that aspect. But if you're looking at our workflow and that's on Blackboard, the first thing that you want to do with adjusting color correction in your edits is you want to adjust the white and the black points first. So if you're looking here and it says the white balance is the first thing, we're not going to touch that right just yet. Okay, we're going to actually work on getting the whites to a little bit closer to 100 and the blacks a little bit closer to 0. Okay, so there's creative down here, there's curves, all that stuff. We're just going to be in the basic correction module right here. All right. So we're going to go to the tone, and the tone is going to affect the whites and the darks down here. So, ordinarily I do not say this, but it's okay to, because Premiere is pretty intuitive, it's okay to start with the auto. And then you can see what it did over in their scopes here, where it made it a little bit more balanced. You can always preview before and after. Do you see how the scopes change on the left-hand panel right there? Okay, so that did an overall good job. Let's see, we need the whites to get a little bit closer to 100 and then the blacks a little bit closer to 0. So I'm going to go ahead and push the whites up, push the whites, and then I'm going to push the blacks. Okay, so we've blown out a little bit here. Probably need to not overcorrect that way. We've blown out a little bit of the highlights here. We can see that we lost that detail and then the shadows, but we can bring those back. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of contrast. Okay, and that's just going to balance out my scope just a little bit. I'm just going to add in a little contrast that was missing. I'm going to bring in my highlights, bring down my highlights so I can bring back that detail. Okay, a little bit balanced right there. And then shadows, let's bring those down just a little bit too. Okay, so if we're looking, this is where we were, ooh, gross. This is where we were before, and this is where we are after. Now, that's pretty good way to clean it up. Next, so we're done with the tone right here, but next we noticed the RGB, that the blue is a little bit too blue in the highlights here. So what we can do is expand this and use our little nifty white balance selector. If you have footage that is that doesn't have a true white or true black, let's say it's in something that's really green and you can't find your whites and blacks, you're going to have to gauge it a little bit. But luckily she's wearing a white apron, so you can go ahead and use your eyedropper tool and select that white apron, and then all of a sudden, before, after, we can see that this has dramatically cleaned this up. So, and then if we're looking over at our blue, do you see before, after? That's very much more balanced. Okay, and so the next thing that we need to get her skin values up a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and do tone and just boost the saturation. And you see what it's doing to that scope right there? It's going to go across that line and just boost the saturation so she looks like she's alive, first and foremost. And here we are before, ugh, gross, so gross, to after. So it's a very basic beginner look into adjusting different problem areas in clips, but a lot will get you, a mix of fine tuning like the auto portions versus kind of fine tuning, bring back the highlights, and just reading your scopes, read them. So with a white balance selector, if it's off with, you don't have quite something in the white range that you can use as eyedropper, you can manually change the tint. This is just like using hue saturation in like Photoshop, that sort of thing. Okay, so we will get into the creative and curves and all that stuff when we get into color grading next week. But for this, I just want you to go through each clip, and then I want you to go through the same process. Make assessments. What needs to be fixed here? Reading this, is this too saturated? You can tell it's too saturated. Looking at your levels, fixing those, looking at your RGB values, and getting those more even. So when you're looking at footage here, it's a little bit subjective with just your eye, but if you're comparing your eye, your initial assessment with the scopes, and then you're balancing and you're constantly checking before and after to see if it's a good edit. You don't want to ever overcorrect. Same thing with over here. Make an assessment. Bring up the shadows. Bring down the highlights. You can see what needs to be done. 100 to 0 is your basic level there. You can see that this saturation needs to be boosted up a little bit too. So go through each of these. This shouldn't take you more than 20 minutes to do. Make these corrections, and next week we'll do color grading and audio.